All right, the AP Top 25 poll is out and updated, and Georgia remains #1, but we have now seen some movement in the top 5 with Ohio State's win. The thrilling ending against Notre Dame. Ohio State now at 4 after jumping 2 spots, leapfrogging Florida State, which won on the road to Clemson, but goes from 4 to 5. One interesting note here on Washington, 4-0 with Kalen DeBoer also receiving 1 first-place vote. USC remains undefeated, but they dropped down 3 spots to #8, and then Oregon and Utah round out the top 10. So that is 4 Pac-12 teams in the top 10. As we continue the conversation here, Notre Dame does fall a couple spots from 9 to 11. Alabama's win does get them up. And then you see there Miami, Oregon State, and Ole Miss. The Beavers and Rebels drop 5 spots each due to their losses in the ranked-on-ranked matchups. And we saw Colorado at 19 last week, and you are seeing it there, folks. Coach Prime and his Buffaloes are no longer in the AP Top 25 after their blowout loss at Oregon in Eugene. In fact, they're the 3rd most team receiving votes behind Kansas State, Kentucky, and Colorado. By the way, UCLA dropping out of the top 25, and then Mizzou, Kansas, and Jeff Tedford's Fresno State Bulldogs rounding out the top 25. All right, I'm Tommy Tran, joined by Brady Quinn to break down this latest rankings release. And we first have to talk about Colorado. Much hype coming in, catching 3 touchdowns against Dan Lanning and his crew. But they go from 19, Brady, to not even ranked this week.
I think it gives you a little bit of an idea as far as, how people see Colorado stacking up versus some of the top 25 teams, some of the best teams in the country. And week 1, upset down in Fort Worth. As it continued to build, we kind of thought this was just a Cinderella story, but the reality is when you take on some of the best in the Pac-12, the one disparity that we saw was in the trenches. That defensive front for Oregon got after Shedeur Sanders. He's been sacked a lot this season, almost more so than any other quarterback. 7 sacks in this one, interception as well. And the offensive line for Oregon really had its way and did whatever it wanted to do versus Colorado's defense. That's the one area that Colorado's got to improve upon in order to compete with the likes of an Oregon and even this upcoming season versus USC, something that, to be quite honest, USC struggled with last year in the trenches, both offensively, defensively. They hit the portal hard. They're a lot better now, almost a 4-touchdown favorite, taking on Colorado next week. But look, Colorado's made a lot of progress from where they were a year ago. We can't lose sight of that. They're hitting this meat or the toughest part of their schedule, and they're going to learn a lot about themselves, develop some callus to kind of build up for the future.
Let's just stick with the Pac-12. I mentioned how top-heavy they are in the top 10 right now. How do you evaluate the conference?
The Pac-12, I mean, it's, to me, the best in college football. Now, there's not quite as many teams as we saw in recent AP polls, only 6 this time around because a couple teams obviously dropped out. But when you look at USC, the offensive firepower, Washington State, now it's a part of this list. Utah's been winning despite the fact that Cam Rising still has not played a game. They're 4-0 with the back of Nate Jaws. They were able to take care of business versus UCLA, holding to 7 points, a team that's been rushing about as good as anyone in the country right now. So, to me, it's as good as it gets. And the one team that never gets enough attention, because they're out of the Pacific Northwest, is Washington. They play late sometimes. No one's watching what Michael Penix is doing. This team can put up points. They can shut you down. They've got a little bit of everything. So as the season wears on, continue to keep an eye on Washington. They're the ones that could end up coming out and surviving through the Pac-12. But as we know, it's a gauntlet. And usually that's been the demise of the Pac-12, is they've been beating each other up and unfortunately not getting a team to the playoff. And this is really the last year in its existence as we know it, to see if they can get one in there.
Kalen DeBoer and company, his Huskies, they have a trip in Tucson to take on the Wildcats at Arizona, and they do have Oregon and USC on the horizon. Again, sticking with that top 10, any problems for you between Ohio State and Florida State with the sort of 4-5 flip-flop there?
Kind of interesting. I mean, a little recency bias, I guess. I mean, if you look at the Florida State win over LSU was, I think, was ranked higher at the time, so it should have looked at as a better win for Florida State. However, Ohio State leapfrogs Florida State in this case. Florida State moves back a spot, even though they got a good road win versus Clemson. Now, a lot of people will look at that game and say, well, Clemson had the opportunity to kind of win that back in regulation. Didn't work out quite that way. So maybe that's how they're judging this particular week. But Ohio State and Florida State are right there. Look, it's too early for me to get too concerned or looking into who are the top four at this point. There's a lot of good football left to be played. There's 10, 11 teams, in my opinion, that I think still, maybe even 12, still have have a legitimate shot of making their way in the playoff and a chance for a national championship.
We had 6 ranked, unranked matchups this past weekend. It could have been 7. Clemson was just on the outside looking in there. Let's get to Alabama. They do bounce back. They get the win against Ole Miss right now. Where are you at with the Crimson Tide?
Well, Jalen Milroe is their quarterback moving forward. We know that now, in particular after this performance. It's not perfect. He's still a work in progress, but I think they found their formula now, too. Just running the football, controlling the game, allowing Milroe to use his legs, and as he develops as a passer, hitting some more of those shots downfield, but stingy defense. I mean, this is one of your old school Nick Saban-led teams where you're going to lead by shutting teams down and then not making mistakes on offense and forcing others to make those mistakes. So, look, this Alabama team is still very much in the mix right now. They proved that this past week with a nice win over Ole Miss. Yes, they lost to Texas, but Texas is most likely to end up being the Big 12 champion. So that actually will work well in Alabama's favor if they can still find a way to the SEC championship game and find a way of beating what is presumed to be Georgia, who they'll meet.
As we continue to look at teams 11 through 20, Notre Dame dropped a couple of spots out of the top 10 at 11, Brady. So you're Fighting Irish and then also Duke on the horizon. 4-0 are the Blue Devils in the ACC, and they go up to 17 here on this list. What are you looking out for in that one?
Well, look, Duke is playing as good as anyone right now. Riley Leonard, their quarterback, has been phenomenal. You know, Mike Elko, their head coach, who's got a defensive background, has got that defense shutting down. He's recruited, developed well. So there's no easy test right now for this stretch for Notre Dame's schedule. You can't allow this past loss, especially the way they lost to Ohio State, to impact them moving forward. There's too many good matchups between Duke, USC, at Louisville on the horizon, and then obviously Clemson later on down the road. So it's a rough schedule for Notre Dame. They've got to, pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and get ready to go for another battle this week.
So let's talk about Wazoo, a team that seemingly cannot crack our guy Dennis Dodd's power rankings, and we'll get to Dennis on that on Monday. But, boy, they are doing some fun things out in Pullman right now, continuing to win.
Cam Ward is phenomenal, okay? I mean, again, up there in the Pacific Northwest, no one's like talking about Washington State and Pullman. He's one of the best dual threat quarterbacks. He's number 3, I think, in my opinion, right now in the Heisman race. I've got all these Pac-12 quarterbacks lumped in there, but this is a good football team now. They took on an Oregon State defense that was the top as far as the Pac-12 entering in this past week, the best at generating sacks, and Cam Ward was able to neutralize a lot of that with his dual threat ability and play. And the defense stepped up when it needed to get enough stops to stop Oregon State trying to come back in that one. So this is a legitimate contender in part because of their quarterback. But look, they've got all the right pieces moving forward. Again, it comes down to the fact that no one's got an easy schedule. When you look at all the Pac-12 schedule, where it plays out, Washington State doesn't have to play SC, but they got to play Washington, they got to play Oregon, they got to play the rest of Colorado at some point later on down the road. It's a gauntlet of a schedule, so we'll see if they can hang on, but it's been an awesome story in college football so far.
So we don't have as much of a stacked slate this week that we did last week, but as we take a look ahead to what we're seeing, there are going to be ranked teams, of course, in action in the AP Top 25. And as we digest some of this, obviously we've talked about the Trojans and the Buffaloes, and Georgia will be laying 18.5 at Auburn. But in terms of macro stuff, Brady, we were talking about this Big Ten. Where are we at? Because they're at the very top, yes, but the rest of the AP Top 25, nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, 3 in the top 6, and then you don't have anywhere else. It's a very top-heavy conference right now, and we'll see as the season wears on how things continue to develop. But you're looking at the Pac-12, probably the strongest. The SEC can make a case, too, with some of the teams they have. The Big 12 starting to play a factor, but also the ACC. So it's a pretty level playing field. I think it has a lot to do with the fact, as we talk about all these quarterbacks, and you mentioned Cam Ward, you talk about Caleb Williams, Michael Penix, they're all transfers. Everyone's a transfer. It's Sam Hartman, transfer. Transfer quarterbacks have given other teams who are in need of a quarterback that equalize and that opportunity to compete and put themselves in this situation. So it's incredible to see how the transfer portal has leveled the playing field in college football and created parity amongst a lot of other conferences.
Penn State is certainly dangerous, and they took care of Iowa at home. They were 14.5-point favorites, and there was a total of about 40 in that game. And then Iowa, of course, getting bounced out from that loss. Our thanks to Brady Quinn breaking down the latest from the AP Top 25. Brady, certainly appreciate it. And, of course, always keep track on CBSSports.com. We'll have you covered. But, again, notable movers in the AP Top 25. Washington State moving up those 5 spots. Oregon State and Ole Miss, by virtue of their losses over the weekend, they moved to 19 and 20 respectively. And Billy Napier, 25 last week. Their victory does get them over Charlotte up to number 22. And, of course, we talked about Colorado going from 19 to out of the top 25.